I think I first saw Chinese writing when I was 15 years old. Blew my mind. I just thought, this is impossible. And so I got really interested in that. And then when I was always interested in computer. My dad bought a home computer way back. And so putting those two things together, when I got to college, I found out that's an actual field of study trying to do computer linguistics. We call it natural language processing started really during World War II because the Allies were trying to decipher the messages of the German army who used these encrypting machines. And so if they could use machines to encrypt the messages, they figured, hey, we could use machines to decrypt, except that's a lot harder, so they had to build these proto-computers. You know, that original problem was a natural language processing problem because a stream of letters come in and a stream of letters go out, and the stream of letters that go out should be, you know, plain German that anybody could understand what the message was. So natural language processing goes way, way back. And then after that, shortly after the war, information theorist named Warren Weaver, he had this idea that we could treat translation as a decryption problem. So pretend that Russian is really English, but it's been decoded, and try to decode it back into English. In the 50s, there was this work on machine translation, translating between human languages automatically. It was kind of a failure because the computers at that time weren't powerful enough to store and process that information, and also because people weren't, it was very difficult to write down all the rules of every language. Too many rules. It takes people years and years to, you know, get adept at human language, and trying to do it by brain surgery, adding all of those rules to the machine one by one, didn't work out. So throughout the 60s and 70s, kind of those were the approaches that were tried. In the late 80s, early 90s, things took a turn for the better, where we started to ask the machines to learn those rules by themselves without us explicitly programming them. As scientists, we didn't think about any of that. We just think it's a sweet technical problem to try to get computers to understand human speech, type out what you said, and to translate that into other languages. You know, for us, that's good enough. Let's just do it. And I think we anticipated the general need, which came really with the internet. So once that was there, many people were getting connected to each other, and not everybody speaks the same language. And then with cell phones, where, you know, you'd like to talk to your cell phone and ask it to do things using your voice instead of by typing with your fingers. You know, we didn't imagine any of that when we were working to try to solve these problems. They're just fundamental problems in intelligent behavior. I'd say probably the U.S. Department of Defense had their own needs for speech and translation, and so those were the kind of I guess funding channels that enabled all that early scientific work. Claude Shannon was the founder of information theory. That's a truly fundamental theory of how to manipulate bits, and you know, that went in many directions to computational finance, to gambling, to many AI directions, but speech and translation was one of the big ones. And a guy named Fred Jelinek took Shannon's ideas and really spearheaded to their application to do speech and translation in a very early project at IBM. Gathered around a really good group. They worked for about 6 years, and then the leaders decamped to Wall Street. So they became billionaires doing computational finance instead of computational linguistics. But you know, a few of us after that sort of rediscovered what they were up to and realized its potential. And then in 1999, we held a workshop that got those ideas out and the software out to where all the scientists could use them. So a human learns languages by, you know, from the time you're a baby, you're in the world, your parents are talking to you, pointing at things. So a machine lives inside of a, you know, kind of environment where there's none of that. There's, you know, it not able to touch the world or see the world. It just lives in an environment of words. And the main training material we give it is material that's been translated by people. Originally, the first set of documents we used to train these machines was the Canadian Parliament proceedings, because by law, Canadian law, those have to be published in English and French. So here we had millions of English sentences. Each one has a French translation. And so the machine can say, you know what, every time they say this word in English, the translator types that word in French. And every time we see this phrase, they seem to translate it either in one of two ways. and the machine can, by working overnight or maybe for a whole week, analyze that, learn all these patterns from that data, and then apply those patterns to sentences that it's never seen before. In 1999, we were very fired up about this automatic learning technology, but it was not deliverable. I mean, it would take 24 hours to translate a single page of text, and not that well. But we could see that the system was going to get better and better because it could learn for itself, and the more data we gave it, the more it would learn, and the faster it would get if we were smart. And then we had a nice project at ISI on this topic. Daniel Marcu and I were working on it. We added to our team a fellow named Franz Och from Germany, excellent scientist that I met in 1999, and a bunch of fantastic graduate students. So here at ISI and other places, we were all working to make this technology better and better, faster, more accurate. Franz Och went off to Google to start this kind of automatic learning technique within Google Translate, and I think something like 2006 it came out, and it was a big hit. And then simultaneously, in terms of commercial development, Daniel Marcu and I founded a spin-off company from USC, from ISI, called Language Weaver. And that was the first company to commercialize this kind of approach to statistical MT machine translation. So at Language Weaver, we built translation systems for dozens and dozens of languages. And they have many uses. So, for example, in the Defense Department, for translating between different languages or they're spoken around the world. For commercial use, to have that translator, automatic translator, pre-translate a bunch of text, maybe not perfectly, but then a human translator can fix it up very quickly. And that kind of combination of machine translation with human translation was much more effective and efficient than just a human translator working from scratch. I was involved in Language Weaver, which did machine translation. It was a startup out of ISI. Also involved in Specifio, which used natural language generation in the legal field. So what we did in that company is to write software that writes patents. So you supply the software with basically your idea written in a set of claims of novelty. And that's usually like a page or two. And then the machine takes that and writes the rest of the patent, which is usually about 20 pages. So that's normally written by a patent attorney. It takes them a long time to do that, very expensive for the client. And so, so now people can write patents much more cheaply using that software. So at Specifio, we use the software to write our own patents. So there's a US patent about software that writes patents. And that patent was actually written by software that writes patents. And we could generate intellectual property for the company very fast. What I've been working on at ISI mostly was a machine translation of languages. And when I looked into the history of that field, it came out of the decryption kind of work during World War II. And so thinking of translation as a kind of decoding problem helped us to crack the translation problem. But once you start thinking about decoding and decrypting, there's a lot of other things you can apply that technology to. And one of them is historical and ancient manuscripts. These need to be decrypted because nobody can read them. And so, very famous cases like the Egyptian hieroglyphs were famously deciphered, in the 1800s and many others in the 1900s. And so, those things have always been fascinating to lots of people, including me. I think there's a lot of application for historians to understand what happened, but for scientists or natural language processing experts, I think for us it's just, can we read it or can we not read it? Can we be the first person to read that document in hundreds or thousands of years? And that's just exciting enough for us. So I was giving a talk in Sweden to a bunch of my colleagues there and talking about machine translation and a little bit about this decipherment of documents that we've been working on. And someone came up to me afterwards, a colleague, and she said, hey, I got this book. It's in cipher. It was given to me by my advisor in Germany. He couldn't read it, and the person who gave it to him couldn't read it, and no one's been able to read it. Would you like to take a look? So I said, sure, no problem, and that sounds interesting. So I went back to LA, didn't think anything about it. 2 weeks later, this huge FedEx shows up on my desk, 300-page document, and and pretty interesting. I mean, it's totally unreadable, and no one's been able to read it. So I thought, okay, we can do this. So I took some of the software that we'd been building for translation and for decipherment, and applied it. Didn't work at all. Just said gibberish. And then I asked the software, well, what do you think the original language was, at least? Was it French or Romanian? And in fact, my colleague had told me she thought it was Albanian. So I spent a fair amount of time trying to follow up this Albanian rabbit hole. But the software said, no, I think it's German. So the German output was kind of ridiculous, nonsense German, but at least it pinpointed that, and that gave us enough direction to follow up. So then, a combination of machine grunt work and human, intuition, we could decipher this manuscript, which turned out to be from a secret society in Germany in the 1700s. So 1700s, there were a lot of secret societies. It was kind of all the rage, and each one had their own thing they specialized in. But historians are very interested in that period of time, and so being able to decipher this book gives them a lot of material to work with. Yeah. So the very first page says. And this is very exciting because we deciphered the very first page, and it said, "The candidate enters the room. He takes his seat. The something asks a question, and then blindfolds the candidate. And then the candidate is asked to read a piece of paper." And it goes on like this. And they ask the candidate, "Are you completely committed to this, to what we're doing here?" And the candidate says yes. So it's some kind of initiation into this secret society that they're describing. And then the rest of the book talks about kind of what this society does and a lot of their kind of interesting discussions, including political discussions, which are very interesting for people who study that time period. A lot of the founders of the U.S., a lot of the revolutionaries in the U.S. Revolutionary War were also members of different secret societies. So there's a lot of interest in that. And what happened there behind the scenes. So I get to meet all kinds of people with all kinds of cipher problems, and from people who've discovered things in their attic, from their deceased family members, all the way to television shows that are trying to catch serial killers. So that's really a fun part of this job. Well, the one that we worked the most on is called the Voynich manuscript, and that's from the 1400s. It's the oldest. This is the holy grail of deciphering. Despite all the work, no one's been able to decipher that yet. And we had a similar situation with Zodiac serial killer cipher. This was somebody who murdered a bunch of people in California in the 60s and 70s, and he sent these taunting letters to the police saying, if you can read this letter, in cipher, then you'll know who I am and you'll be able to catch me. And they deciphered the first letter where he didn't reveal who he was, but no one could decipher the second letter. It's 340 characters, looks pretty simple, but after 50 years, none of us could do it. And a lot of people would conclude, oh, it's a hoax. This guy from beyond the grave is laughing at us because we're still puzzling away with his hoax thing. But then, after 51 years, a colleague of mine named David Aronchek and two collaborators actually solved it. So for the first time, we could read that message, and it's extremely satisfying. Still didn't catch the guy yet, so more work to be done. One of the first things I worked on was called natural language generation. That's where the computer's got some idea and it wants to express it in words. And it has to pick the right words, put those words in the right order so that someone listening will get the right meaning, the thing the computer intended to say. And I used to work on that as part of a translator. So one team, in this case it was in Pittsburgh, they tried to write the software that understands the input sentence in English, and then I would write a program that would try to take that meaning representation and spit it out in French. Okay, so it's a kind of meaning to text. And so in this area of generation, we did a lot of work. In particular, I think around 2015, we got interested in generating poetry. So could a machine generate, interesting, compelling poetry in English where the content was, would grab you, but also the form was followed, and the rhyming and the rhythm was followed. So and we had a super successful very early poetry writing system that used neural networks, which had really just starting to be applied to language at that time. It was called Hafez, and it was built by a graduate student at ISI and me. One of the nice things about the poetry writing system was we had a human control system for it. So you could say, hey, I want it to be about this, maybe Civil War or butterflies or a battleship, whatever you want the poem to be about, it'll write it about that. But you also had some sliders where you, on the screen, where you could say, hey, could you make this a little bit more bright and sunny, or could you make this poetry a little bit more dark and menacing? And as you move that slider, the poem would change on the right part of your screen. Do you want to have a few curse words in there, or should we take the curse words out? Should you use longer words? Should you use shorter words? Do you want to ban a particular word that you don't like and that the computer keeps using? And in this interaction between the human and the machine poetry system, we could get excellent poems coming out, indistinguishable from human writers. And that was a turning point for me in this field of natural language generation. It had always been kind of the an area of natural language processing that was less studied. And now I think the implications are huge and the applications are huge. So then you think, okay, well, that's kind of computer art. It's nice, but is there an application for something like that? So we found an application for the poetry writer, which was to make it easier for you to remember your passwords. So you probably got a password like $$Z495, and the reason you picked that is because it's very secure, no one can guess it. Or you've got a password like password 1 or ABCDEFG because you can easily remember it, but people can hack it. So what we wanted to do was give you a password that's both easy to remember, but would be almost impossible for someone to guess. And in the ancient times, people were able to remember things by making them into poetry, making them rhyme, and they could remember huge epics and recite them word for word. And so we were able to build a system that could give you a poem as your password. I came to ISI in 1992, right after graduate school. It was a real kind of nexus for the field that I was in, natural language processing. So I always had been reading papers in graduate school that were coming out of ISI. That the ISI author at the top of the page, and then it said 4676 Admiralty Way. So we all knew this mysterious Admiralty Way. That's the street where ISI is on. So when I came for an interview, actually here I am at ISI on Admiralty Way, and very excited to meet everyone and to learn about what's going on, and to think how I could contribute. Ed was a super good interviewer. He took me to the USC campus, personally toured me around there, introduced me to all the people, professors on campus and all the researchers at ISI. I remember he even took me to the computer room at ISI. Not sure why. It was on the 12th floor. You open up, it's very cold, lots of computers. I think he just wanted to convince me that this is a real deal. And after that, flew back, and it was by far the best choice. And looking back, I would for sure do it over again. What ISI gave me was a lot of freedom and time to spend on my research ideas. So many times when you're a junior professor somewhere, your time gets frazzled, and you've got to teach, you've got to talk to these students, you've got to apply for grants right out of the gate, and you've got some time to spend on your research, but it's not 100. I think I spent 95% of my time on my own research ideas for the first few years I was at ISI. I know Yolanda used to come and tease me because she would catch me at my desk with a blank piece of paper on the desk and a pencil in my hand, kind of thinking. And she said, that's great. I mean, that's kind of for me, that was ideal. I came a year before Craig Knobloch, and he and I, one thing that we were missing at ISI that we had in graduate school was a weekly seminar series on artificial intelligence. So, instead of just sitting and complaining about it and thinking things were better then, we decided to start that seminar series. And I think maybe 30 years later, 50 years, how long is this? Yeah, we decided to start that seminar series ourselves, and it's been running for good 30 years, week in, week out. People are applying artificial intelligence, natural language processing to lots of scientific domains, like biology. if a machine could read a lot of biology papers, ingest all that material, organize it, and then present it to biologists, would those human biologists be more effective at their work? Could they come up with new ideas? Could they test their ideas faster? One area that's not yet receiving a lot of interest is mathematics. So if you think about things like Fermat's last theorem or number theory or geometry, all those things are done painstakingly by hand by mathematicians. And the pace of development of basic mathematics is kind of bound by how fast very expert mathematicians can work. If computers could also read the mathematical literature and collect up all those theorems, organize them in a really nice way, and then maybe artificial intelligence could suggest ways to extend those theories and theorems, come up with new mathematical knowledge, maybe even get a flywheel going where each bit of new knowledge enables the machine to come up with more knowledge. That would be a tremendous breakthrough for math, and math has an impact on every science. I think a really cool thing is if you ask a machine to read a math paper, it'll actually know whether it understood the math paper because it'll produce a formal proof of the theorem in that paper. Whereas if you give the machine a biology paper to read and you say, hey, machine, did you understand that biology paper? It'll say, yeah, sure, but there's no way to really check it. So anyway, math has kind of become a personal interest of mine, especially number theory, and applying AI to number theory in mathematics is going to be big. In ISI's artificial intelligence group, I think the culture got set back in the early 90s when a bunch of us arrived from graduate school. And we wanted to model it as a very open research environment where everybody knew what everybody else was doing and felt free to comment and provide suggestions and free to get suggestions from other people. All the doors were open in the hallways. We started regular seminar series, and those things really allowed people to cross the boundaries between different projects and work with each other. And another thing is, we're there 12 months out of the year. Nobody wanders off during the summers. We're all working on super cutting edge projects because a lot of the projects are funded by the DARPA and NSF, and you can't get that work unless you're doing cutting edge projects. So there's really no one kind of sitting around, staring at their own belly button, worried about their weird projects that nobody cares about. Everybody's really on the cutting edge.